There's nowhere that I go from the presence of God. And I think that one of the things that we get really wrong is we kind of compartmentalize our lives. We have God at church, but then we get in the car and we forget that God moved into the car with us. And then we go home and we turn the TV on and we forget that God's there with us. You should include God in everything, in the sense that, am I doing things that please the Lord? Am I saying things that please the Lord? Am I acting towards my kids in a way that pleases God? And I think we make the mistake of compartmentalizing rather than including God in everything. Who is the original architect of the family, and what is the plan for building a solid home? Architects will tell you that the most frustrating thing that they experience is they design a plan and then the builder does his own thing. And this has to be frustrating to God, because in the Bible, for example, there's a lot of information about how to have a great home. So, it starts in Genesis chapter 2 when God puts Adam and Eve together. And if you look in verse 21 of Genesis 2, it says, "The Lord caused a deep sleep to fall on Adam, and he slept, and he took one of his ribs and closed up his flesh in his place. And the rib which the Lord God had taken from the man, he made into a woman, and he brought her to the man." So here's God bringing the bride down the altar, giving her to Adam. And Adam said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She should be called woman, because she was taken out of man." So in verse 24, we have the first marital advice. "Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." Well, that's the basic elementary foundation to having a happy marriage, is leaving and cleaving. Okay? You got to leave your mother and father and cleave unto your wife or your husband. The problem with a lot of relationships are they never leave mom and dad. So you got to leave, there's several ways. You got to physically leave. You got to leave physically. You got to leave emotionally. Instead of calling mama to make you feel better, guy, you now lean on your wife. You leave him physically, emotionally, and financially. And a lot of problems erupt in marriage. You ask people, why do people get divorces? There's 4 reasons. 1 is sex. 2 is money issues. I forget the 3rd one, but I know the 4th one is in-laws. Well, it's not children. Could be, though. But there's the 4 biggies. But one of them is in-laws. In-laws are getting their fingers all in the relationship. So you got to leave mom and dad. And it's wonderful if you're in the same town. It's wonderful if you can see them often. But it's just like a lot of people never leave their parents. And it doesn't mean you don't have anything to do with your mom and dad. That would be a shame to me. But things should change now when you get into a relationship. But people don't want to do that. I've seen a lot of ladies get in trouble because they admire their father more than they admire their husband. Daddy's still the hero. Well, I know you're married to a young whippersnapper that's got a lot to learn, right? But he's the leader. But the problem is we don't want to follow the original architect. We that's good, God. That was relevant a long time ago, but it's 2018 now. Come on. But I would not say that in 2018 our marriages are as strong as ever. I'd say they're a mess. Because we're not following the original architect. And that's what the psalmist is saying. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. So if you're doing everything the exact opposite of what God says, how do you expect to build a successful house? Jesus himself talked about that. When he says, if you're building a house on the sand, it's going to go into the ocean. If you're building a house on the firm foundation of God and his word, it will last. It will last. And I will tell you that building a house on God's foundation is very counterculture right now, but it's the best way. So follow the original architect, and that's what the psalmist is saying. It's unless the Lord builds a house, they labor in vain who build it. 2, so not only follow the original architect, but 2, include God in everything. Include God in everything. So it says, unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman stays awake in vain, or it's useless for him. So one of the things that I think is important for every family to do is to include God in every room in your house. So one of the things that's helped me in my life, and it kind of happened by accident, but when I was a little kid, our pastor had an adult son. His name was Gary. He's actually a pastor now out in California. And he watched me and my brothers, and he was the worst babysitter ever because he scared us. He'd turn all the lights off in the house and hide, and we'd have to go try to find him, and he'd scare us, and he thought that was funny. And he'd set us all around the table and tell us, about the spirit world, and anyway, it was just I don't think maybe my parents are learning this for the first time, but he was a terrible babysitter, Mom, Dad, so. Didn't get much sleep when he was around. So, but I remember one night he was sitting around, he was talking about, he goes, there are angels all around us, and there's angels in this, and there could be an angel sitting in that chair right there. Well, we lived over here on Mountain View Street, which is 10 blocks from here, and it was a real windy day, and we had a back porch, and the door to the back porch didn't get shut all the way, and he's telling me about how there's angels here, and it's probably sitting in that chair right there, and the wind picked up and caught that door and slammed it up against the patio. I'm telling you what, I had a come to Jesus minute. Right? I mean, it was like, he's speaking the truth, and the angels are trying to get in the house. There's some out there, and they're trying to get in the house. But what he did is he awakened me to the fact that God is here. And in the sense that there's nowhere that I go from the presence of God. And I think that one of the things that we get really wrong is we kind of compartmentalize our lives. And like we have God at church, but then we get in the car and we forget that God moved into the car with us. And then we go home and we turn the TV on and we forget that God's there with us. And then we go into the bedroom and we forget that God's there with us. And I'm just saying that you should include God in everything, in the sense that, am I doing things that please the Lord? Am I saying things that please the Lord? Am I acting towards my kids in a way that pleases God? And I think we make the mistake of compartmentalizing rather than including God in everything. And he's just emphasizing again, unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. So I want to include God in everything because I want God involved in my family. I want God involved in my marriage and in my dealing with my kids and dealing with my grandchild and dealing with my friendships. And I want God involved in everything. And I don't want to compartmentalize him, but I want him involved in every aspect of my life. So when I sit down at the dining room table, I want him involved, Man that's given to appetite should put a knife to his throat or something like that. That was kind of supposed to be funny, but not really. But you shouldn't be a glutton, I guess. I want to bring God in there, and I want to bring God in every part of my house. And because I'm not going to see success if it's just my way. I want God involved. And I want God involved in my family. And a happy home comes when I include God in everything. So then he says this, it is vain for you to rise up early and to sit up late. So the third way to have a happy home is to reject empty activities. To reject empty activities. One of the things that's neat about pastoring in the town you grew up in is that I can drive by the houses that I used to live in. So the first house we lived in Topeka was 1331 Argyle Street. And 1331 Argyle, that house still stands. And it's small and old. But do you know that not one time when I lived in that house till I was 9 years old. I never remember walking in the house going, what a dump. This is the tiniest thing ever. Because it's small. I mean, like you drive by it and you're like, this is a small house. But I have a lot of memories there. I remember the wood fence is still up, that was up, and I climbed up that fence and jumped off of it, turned my ankle. Had a swing set in the back, got that thing going as high as I could, and I was hoping to jump onto the roof. Didn't make it that far. Didn't break my ankle, but severely turned it. Just a lot. I remember those memories. I don't ever remember saying, man, this house is well, my dad needs to step up his job game. So when I was 9, we bought a house. My parents bought a house at 3501 Mound View, which is close to here. And I lived there. My parents lived there until, I got out of the house and got married. And then my parents moved to Texas for 10 years or so. And but we lived in that house. And it was funny, when we moved back to Topeka, that house came up for sale. And actually, Karen and I went and looked at it. And I remember walking in the door going, this thing's dinky. I mean, I remember going, because when you're a kid, man, everything's so big. That's the biggest house, and then you go to it and it's like, man, this is small. I'm not buying this house. so I remember kind of thinking how small this, and I say all that to say that from a kid's perspective, what I remember is not the house we lived in. I remembered the parents that I had. I remembered the investment that my parents put in me. I didn't really care about the stuff. I mean, my mother was a Christian school teacher, and she taught for $100 a week. I mean, it's more of a ministry than it was a job. She didn't make a lot of money. And it really kind of stunk, to be honest with you, having your mom at the same school you went to. Because anytime you got in trouble, it was just like, well, I'll deal with Mark right here. Most kids they had to wait till they got home. We just dealt with it right there, and that wasn't necessarily the greatest. And my dad worked for the railroad, and but I would just tell you, and we ate pretty simple. We were talking about, man, growing up, we had pot pies one night a week, because they were like 25 cents. We'd have pot pies, and we ate out every Friday night. That was our one time a week that we ate out. And then we had 2 times a week, we'd have hot dogs and mac and cheese. And I love hot dogs and mac and cheese, loaded with carbs and junky stuff, but it's good food, right? So we lived pretty simple, and I never remembered wishing we had more stuff. And I just think that we live in this culture now where it's like we got to give our kids everything. So we got to work all the time and not be around our kids, but they got nice shoes and they all got Xboxes and TVs in their room and everybody's hooked up, but they don't have a home. We spend a lot of energy doing empty activities to buy more stuff. And I'm convinced, man, my kids and your kids and everybody's kids don't need more stuff. They just need more of you. Like, we're terrified of being bored. Like, I remember Saturdays were the most boring day in our house. My parents would not buy a single thing growing up that was not on special. So Saturday mornings were shop, so they drug us to these grocery stores, every grocery store in Topeka, to buy only what was on special. And it was the worst. And then we'd get home and there wasn't much to do, and we didn't have, I grew up with this little 13-inch television that was black and white. I remember when we upgraded to color. The thing that stunk about having a 13-inch TV was, if you got in trouble, it could easily go out unplugged and into the closet. Right? And so that happened a lot because we were always getting in trouble. So we'd want to watch a football game on a Saturday night and it'd get stuck in the closet. So I remember going into the room and just sitting there and going, man, it's pretty boring in this house. But can I tell you something? When I went to college, you know what days I was the most homesick? Saturday night. Because we just all had to hang out together. And I knew they were all just hanging out together at home, and I missed that. I just want to challenge you. Don't get so concerned about giving your kids a house that you don't give them a home. Give your kids a home. And they got plenty of stuff. So I'm glad the teenagers aren't in here tonight because they'd hate this sermon, wouldn't they? It is vain for you to rise up early and to sleep late. People, we're worn out, man. We're fried because we're doing too much. And then he says this, to eat the bread of sorrows, so he gives his beloved sleep. Well, I think what he's talking about there, to eat the bread of sorrows, I believe he's talking about vanity. It's vain to rise up early and to sit up late and to eat the bread of sorrows. I think he's talking about worry there, about how we get so worried. So number 4, how to have a happy home. Avoid unnecessary anxieties. Avoid unnecessary anxieties. Your kids are picking up your actions. So I think that what happens is we have kids and we get so worried about the future. Is there not a great song that should be a hymn by now? Because He Lives. And then I love that song about how sweet to hold our newborn baby and feel the pride and joy He gives. And basically the implication of that hymn is, and to know that the future is in God's control. If one of the things that I want to challenge all of us to be to our kids is trust the Lord. We get so worried. If you're stressed out, your kids are going to feed off of that. But if you're trusting in God, your kids will see that in your life. And what we do is we have this home and we have these kids and we're worried about their future and we're worried about financial situations and we stress out and we can't get any sleep and we're eating the bread of sorrows and we're worried and concerned. And can I tell you, as the older I get, I just find that God will take care of you. He will get you through. So, worry is this useless activity that we do, right? That doesn't change a doggone thing, does it? I heard a stat the other day that only 10% of what we worry about is legitimate worries. That most of the stuff that we worry about is never going to happen. So what we do is we miss the joy of the moment because we're worried about the future. Okay, I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I know that I have today. So I want to enjoy today with the family that God has blessed me with. Dad, why are you so stressed out? Well, we all may die tomorrow, but are we all dead tomorrow? We're all alive right now. Why can't we just enjoy the moment right now? And we get so worked up about tomorrow. What's going to happen tomorrow? Are we going to make, but we have today. And we miss tomorrow. We miss today because we're so worried about tomorrow. Avoid unnecessary anxieties. God may take your kids, but if you have your kids today, enjoy today. And it doesn't, worrying about what's going to happen to your kids tomorrow is not, it just robs you of the joy of today. And I think that's a mistake a lot of people make, and it's not a happy home because everybody's all uptight. Everybody's worried about tomorrow, worried about what's going to happen, and And just it just doesn't do any good. And this is why Jesus condemned it. I may lose my job tomorrow. Yeah, you may. You have one today? Enjoy today. We worry about things that happen 10 years from now. Why is Dad in a bad mood? Well, the election's in a week and a half. A whole bunch of people got elected, and God didn't resign from the throne. And he ain't going to resign next Tuesday either. He's not going to be like, oh my goodness. What's going to happen? No, he's still in control. So I can be concerned, but man, I could just, if I'm this anxious, nervous Nelly in my house all the time, that's going to have an effect on my kids. I want my kids to look to me and go, you know what, Dad, trust the Lord. Dad's good. Dad's good, I'm good. So if you want to have a happy home, avoid unnecessary anxieties. Teach your children to trust in God. Number 5 is found in verse number 3. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Number 5, magnify the value of relationships. How to have a happy home. Magnify the value of relationships. The most important people inside the structure of your home are the people that live in that home. So, what I want to invest in more than anything is Karen. She's in my house. We have a relationship. And I want that relationship to be healthy. Now, I want to have a good relationship with all of you, but I am shocked at the amount of people who live together but can't stand each other. That woman right there is the most important relationship that I have, without question. So I want to work on that relationship more than I want to work on my relationship with you. I value you, but that's the most important one, the one in my house. The most important congregation that I have, when my kids were growing up, was the kids that lived under my roof. That was my congregation. So I was warned by a lot of pastors who made a lot of mistakes. They said, Mark, do not sacrifice your children on the altar of the ministry. So when my kids were at home, I went to their ball games. So people are like, why are you working at FedEx now? Well, because my kids are all out of the house. I got to pay for what I mortgaged the last 20 years. Right? But I wanted to be with my kids. I knew that I had this little window where I could be with them and be with them on a daily basis. And so that's why I coached their teams. And that's why I went on these trips. And that's why I watched them play. And that's why I watched them sing in choirs and did ministry with them, because I have this little window where God's given me, and I want to value that relationship with them above everything else. I can make money later, but I need to be with them now. And if you have kids, they are gifts from God to you. And never forget that. And I want to challenge those of you that are older and your kids are older. They're still gifts from God. When they moved out of the house, they didn't quit becoming your kids. They're still your kids. So magnify the value of that relationship. And don't sacrifice your kids on the altar of your career. What will it profit a man if he gained the whole world and lose his own soul? What's the point of having all the money in the world if I die and go to hell? And what's the point of having a huge house if I'm the only one living in it? Doesn't seem like much value to me. I know some of you younger parents, you are worn slick. And that is the greatest thing about being a grandparent. They get tired. Hey, time to go home to mama. I don't have to get up in the middle of the night. I don't have to deal with those things. And I know you're worn, but I'm going to tell you something. Savor these moments. Savor these moments. Because you will miss them someday. And they are gifts from God to you. And my kids have taught me more about God than anybody else. So magnify the value of relationships. And they are a heritage. They are a gift from the Lord. And the fruit of the womb is a reward. How do you have a happy home? Number 6, build people over projects. Notice what he says in verse 4. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. So if you go now to the store and you buy an arrow, it's already been sharpened for you, right? I mean, somebody's done the work to sharpen the arrow, and you have a bow and arrow and you go out hunting. In Bible times, there was no Walmart or Dick's Sporting Goods, right? There was no academy. So the point is that your kids are a little rough around the edges. They need some work. So you got to sharpen them. You got to invest in them. You got to build people over projects. This is something that I heard in a sermon I actually was listening to this week, and it really shook me a little bit. Children are the only earthly thing that you can take with you to heaven. They're the only earthly thing that you can take with you to heaven. So you want to invest heavily in them and their spiritual development. Now, only God can save them. But I don't want my kids to die and go to hell and it was because my dad never shared the gospel with me. A god in our culture right now is sports, right? Look, and I love a good sporting event. But we have exalted athletics to the point of parents invest so much time and energy in teaching their kids how to shoot a basket and how to throw a pitch and how to kick a ball. We do all of that, but we neglect the more important things, which I think is their character development and their spiritual development. Those are the things that matter. So you may have the greatest athlete on the planet, but if he's a jerk, who cares? So build people. Invest in the character development of your kids and the spiritual development. I'm not against the sports. I coached my kids in every... I feel bad for my son Cameron because I was his coach from 6th grade to the 12th grade in basketball on some level. I was involved in their physical development, but I did not want to neglect it to the spiritual development and the character development. So you got to shape your kids. That's why discipline comes in, right? Who loves to do that? You have to discipline. It's not a happy home may not be always a joyful home because there's tension and there's conflict, and there's adversity, and there's problems, and you're trying to shape character, and you got to deal with issues. But when you take your kid and you release him like an arrow, you want it to be an arrow that makes a difference in the world. Somebody's going to raise your kids. I think it needs to be us. Somebody's going to teach your kids values. Let it be the parents. And then number 7, the last thing says is, happy is the man who has a quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but shall speak with their enemies in the gates. Number 7, how to have a happy home. Prepare your family for the real world. Prepare your family for the real world. You know what we have a lot of right now is helicopter parents. You know, swooping in on a situation. It is hard to watch your kids get hurt. Okay? It's hard. I remember the first time I saw Matthew get kind of a glimpse of the real world and how not everybody loves you. And there's some really bad people in the world, and there's some jerks out there, and they're going to treat you bad. And I remember kind of sitting back. Nobody did anything physically to him. My life's son was not in danger. His life was not in danger. But you could see he did something out of a pure motive, and the response back was one of, I mean, it was like he'd never seen that before in his life. And you just saw the dimensions change in his face. And man, I wanted to step in there and give that dude a piece of my mind. But I also knew that he was old enough where it's like, all right, he's got to learn there's some big jerks in the world. And he's going to have to deal with it. And he's not going to have dad around all the time. I've told you this before, but the saddest thing to me was years ago when they'd have this American Idol, and people would sing. And Simon, remember, he was just so brutal. He's like, you're terrible. And remember, there would be people, because they'd always show these people that were just shocked that somebody told them that they were bad. Are y'all with me? And I just remember, Karen just thought it was so funny, and I would just sit there and want to cry because I thought, this person has lived for 20-some years of their life, and nobody's ever told them the truth. Right? Oh, you're a good singer. Oh, boy. And everybody else is like, don't tell them the truth. And so it took a rude Englishman to bring them back down to the real world. Isn't it part of my job to be honest with my kids? And to tell them the truth? So that when I shoot them as arrows and send them out into the world, they're not going out here naively going, oh man, what's going on? They will speak. They're not afraid of confrontation. They will speak with enemies in the gates, and they will be confident. And knowing that I have properly trained them to face the enemy. And they don't have to have dad standing behind them. So I think that to have a happy home, you got to prepare your family for the real world. And prepare them spiritually. That you are in a spiritual warfare. And there is an enemy that wants to bring you down. So you got to speak the truth to them. And that's hard sometimes. Sometimes you got to let them get hurt. Sometimes you got to let them get disappointed. And you got to watch their, hearts break. And man, when your kids' hearts break, your heart breaks. But it's maybe the best thing for them in this particular moment. I'll never forget the first time I got in financial trouble. And this is pre-credit card. If you were in financial trouble, you dealt with it. Or waited till the next paycheck came. I remember calling my dad, Dad, I'm at school and I'm in really bad shape. This is exactly what my father said. I'll be praying for you. What? I don't need prayers, I need cash. So for about a week, man, I just went to Wendy's and ate crackers at Wendy's and used their bathroom and grabbed, it was just, now I sure it would have, man, if I could have just talked to Mom. Maybe I could have got some cash out of the deal. But I just am grateful for the parents that I had. And our home, there was a lot of tension because I had parents like this, and I didn't understand a lot of it. Well, I understand it now. And I sure am grateful for them, and they're in the room tonight. I sure am grateful for them, and they did a really good job in the sense that they were really young and were new Christians, and they made a lot of mistakes, but I'm glad I had parents that loved the Lord and tried, rather than just kind of doing what culture and everybody else was telling them to do. And my kids are in the room, minus Courtney. And I know that I made a lot of mistakes as their dad, but I hope that 20 years from now they can look back and say, Dad was kind of weird, but it was a good home to be in. Because I'd rather my kids hate me now and love me later than love me now and hate me later. So I want to have a happy home, don't you? And I want to. So now that Karen and I, I want to enjoy my wife to the end of our days. I just don't want to have a roommate. I want to have a wife. And I want 3423 Hickory Ridge Lane to be a place where that wasn't just a house, that was home. That was a home. So how do I do that? Well, I follow the original architect. I include God in everything. I reject empty activities. I avoid unnecessary anxieties. I magnify the value of relationships. I build people over projects. And I prepare my family and my kids for the real world.